You're listening to Packers Talk Network.
Do you want to experience the thrill of a Packers game at Lambeau Field? If so, be sure to get your game tickets from the longtime trusted source in Wisconsin, Ticket King. Visit their locations in Milwaukee and Green Bay, or just go to their website, theticketking.com. Again, that's theticketking.com.
Check New York Bozo! New York Bozo! New York Bozo!
I got to get my biceps a little bigger.
Yeah, you can always work on that.
Or I could sure use a hot dog with chili.
You know what time the game starts? Hey, you got any left-handed footballs? We need to fire him. Is anybody else tired, or is it just me? Good thing I'm in shape. You got any eligibility left? I got some advice for y'all. Take 2 weeks off, then quit.
Pack to the Future is brought to you by the Ticket King. Whether you're making the trip to see Aaron Rodgers and the Packers play at legendary Lambeau Field, you want to see Giannis and the Bucks at the beautiful Fiserv Forum, or the Badgers, Brewers, or any concert tickets you might need, the Ticket King is your source no matter the occasion. Visit them online at theticketking.com and search their selection for yourself. And remember, there's no such thing as a sellout when you can go to the Ticket King. One more time, that's theticketking.com.
Hello there. We are back with another episode of PTTF Podcast. I am your host, Duke, and I am joined by Matt. Say what's up, Matt.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
This is going to be one of the toughest episodes to be enthusiastic about, Matt. The Packers obviously are coming off a 37-8 loss to the San Francisco 49ers. And my friend, it was a brutal one.
Yeah, there's not a lot of positives you can glean from it. Packers just came out flat. Like, this is a team that has been predicated the last couple of wins on getting out to an early lead and then kind of relying on that pass rush to get to the quarterback. And they simply didn't do it, whether it was the fumble early on to Aaron Rodgers or some really bad penalties that were called, especially the Devontae Adams one. Won't even get into that. But, just things that absolutely, killed drives that kind of crept up on them again. That's something that's been kind of a constant theme the last couple of weeks, especially against San Diego. These California trips have not been kind to the Packers. But, there's going to be a lot that's going to be made over a bad loss in what was a game that had a lot of playoff implications, but you got to survive in advance, right? Like it wasn't a win, but there's still a lot of football left to be played, and there are a lot of weeks to kind of fix some of the things that really ailed them last night.
Right. There's definitely still in-season adjustments that I think the Packers are going to obviously definitely do their best to address with obviously big plays and things like that. But yeah, we could just kind of go through the game here. I mean, from the get-go, there was the big, the penalty on Adams. There was the phantom penalty that was not called, I believe, on the punt return or kick return from, they completely held Josh Jackson on that play. There was no penalty on there. And, there was just things that continued to snowball in the favor of the 49ers, and the Packers really just got behind. And I think they panicked a little bit. I think I think their resolve wasn't the best in the first half. They tried, I think it was well into the second quarter, and it was still a 10-0 game, which was very much, a game where they could have come back, but it didn't feel like a 10-0 game at that point, given how their drives were just shut down and the penalties and the non-penalties and all that stuff that was going on in the first half.
Yeah, especially against a defense like that, once you get down, it's exactly what the Packers have done to teams this year, though, where, they got after them early and then you're playing catch-up the entire time. So the 49ers did, and LaFleur came out today and said it, they were outcoached. They 100% were. And, this was a team that I don't think adjusted very well when they got punched in the mouth. When the Packers have been rolling, they've been rolling because of the scripted plays that were working. So once LaFleur kind of got off script, it just kind of turned into this comedy of errors, really trying to swing in any direction and hope you hit something. And really, it just didn't work at all. I think we'll get into it a little bit more, but I think the biggest thing that was concerning to me was kind of the usage of the running backs. This is something that I feel like LaFleur was so creative with, after like the third week or so where he was using Aaron Jones a lot and using Jamal Williams a lot in the passing game, and Danny Vitale. These are guys that at any one point were having pretty big impacts on the game, but there was a big timeshare yesterday, and Vitale only played 9 snaps yesterday. So it's I don't know if it's necessarily kind of LaFleur getting a little too cute and trying to reinvent the wheel, but this team has very clear strengths in Davante Adams and Aaron Jones in this running attack. So why they got away from that a little bit was concerning to me a little bit.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, when you're a couple notes I had written down, the 49ers took away Aaron Jones as much as LaFleur has in the passing game. And basically they forced Green Bay to beat them with their other weapons. And, there was 2 big play potential plays that stood out to me. And that was one, which was the catch from Graham that wasn't ruled a catch. And then the would-be touchdown grab from MVS, but he couldn't, maintain a position in bounds. And so when your top 3 wide receivers are targeted 19 times and they catch 11 passes for 59 yards for 5.3 yards per catch, and really none of them, and this has been something that's been a little bit of a concern to me, they haven't done very well with, yards after the catch. We remember back in the 2010-11 days where, we were seeing guys like James Jones just stiff-arm guys to the ground, and Jordy Nelson just stiff-arm guys to the ground and get yards after the catch. The Packers' top 3, targets in MVS, Gmo, and Davante Adams, they weren't moving the ball very effectively. But I will throw this in there. Kudos to Jamal Williams because he notched 7 catches on 8 targets for 35 yards, and he was probably the Packers' offensive player of the game, also getting 45 yards on the ground. So, yeah, it was one of those things where I think we are seeing, just a hodgepodge of things that were not, playing out in the Packers' favor. And you said it best with, I think LaFleur just started kind of swinging for the fences there.
Yeah, and I don't know how much of you kind of mentioned something that I kind of wanted to get into a little bit more. And, you saw one of the wide receivers that was traded for at the trade deadline have a pretty solid night last night. And, is that something the Packers really should have explored more? Personally, the market was too steep for that. So I know there are a lot of people that are kind of talking about that today. Emmanuel Sanders was so good. And some of these other receivers that were traded at the deadline are having really good years. Right. That's not necessarily where I think the problem lies. I think it's kind of relying on, clearly Geronimo Allison has had his struggles this year. He had a really bad drop yesterday, and he had 3 catches for 9 yards or something like that. He just isn't getting a lot of separation right now. MVS and Rodgers clearly aren't, in lockstep right now. He's overthrown MVS a lot, which is kind of hard to do, I will admit. But, I just don't think anybody other than Davante Adams, Rodgers has a lot of trust in right now. Alan Lazard has been that the last few weeks, but, he didn't really impact the game yesterday at all. But, I just look at it. Aaron Jones has been so dynamic in that passing game, and how he can't be more involved. Like I'm looking at it, like I'm still stunned. He hasn't been involved. Like he had 0 catches yesterday. Like this is something that he was so impactful against, like the Raiders, against, he had some of these monster games, and you're just wondering, like, how is that completely gone from this offense in such a big game too? Like this is obviously the 49ers is a really good defense, and they try and take away a lot of what going to put out on the field. But, that's where a lot of that plays after the catch can kind of happen is you open it up with your running game. You open up with your running backs. Like, that's how you get a lot of yards after the catch, or, include Danny Vitale, because at times he has had a lot of those plays. So I think a lot, when you get a little bit more predictable on offense and you're not using that creativity with your running backs and your tight ends as much, I think that's where you can kind of tee off against those wide receivers, and you don't get as much yards after the catch. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm trying not to glean too much from yesterday's game because it was just such a bad showing and such bad execution. But, some of these are trends that have started to happen over the last couple of weeks. Right.
I mean, a trend is the right word because, Aaron Jones has caught one pass in the month of November. There's some things that are concerning. One of the things that really concerns me is penalties. Penalties continue to be an issue for the Packers offensively. And, I correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I kind of remember in years past, I don't remember our offensive line having this many issues with, false starts and just delay games and things like that have put the offense behind the sticks as much as they have in this year. And I don't know if it's, them not processing this new offensive system quick enough to where, again, they're making last second checks and the snap counts and all the cadences and all those things, kind of have them just off because, the truth is that those penalties are really, really hurting them. I mean, the Packers offense was 1 of 15 on third down yesterday. And, they converted their first fourth down conversion of the year last night, but they were 1 of 3 on fourth downs as well. And so, I mean, the Packers won the time of possession by nearly 11 minutes, but they were outgained in yardage by 140 yards. The Packers had 25 more plays, and they were outscored by 29 points. And so it's kind of just incredible to me that this offense is really, really struggling. I mean, I think we've seen points of dominance, and we've seen, obviously, like you said, burn the tape, games and matches like this one yesterday. And I'm not sure where the problem lies, entirely, because I think it's just a bunch of everything. But I would definitely agree with you and say at this point, they got to get back to doing what was making them successful, which was running the ball well, being creative, getting the running backs back involved, in the passing game, especially a guy like Aaron Jones.
Well, and I think you touched on something that, who's ultimately responsible. And this is the second game where they've kind of come out just completely flat on both sides of the ball. So it's hard not to say at the end of the day, that doesn't come down to coaching. Like, I just don't think they were overly prepared and they didn't have the right game plan going into this game. And I think the one thing that, we've given him a lot of credit on this, but we also have to keep in mind, this is LaFleur's first year, calling the plays with, Aaron Rodgers, or really just being a head coach. So there is some leeway you do have to give him. You would kind of hope that through 11 weeks, essentially, that leeway is slightly less. But, this was his first, I'll say it, this was his first real test, because in the beginning of the season, like, the Bears game was probably the only other one where I'd say, that was, in prime time on the road. And they pretty much shut down the Bears, but the offense didn't look great in that game. So this was his opportunity to put a stamp on a game, and, they came out flat. So I think at the end of the day, they just kind of need to come into these games with a little bit different of a game plan and also adjust, because this is the second game where they've gotten completely punched in the mouth and had no response to it. Like, they did a good job against it with Philly, but, this is a completely different caliber team that they played last night. And this is a team that's probably, if not the Super Bowl favorite out of the NFC, one of two teams that's the Super Bowl favorite out of the NFC. So and that's the other thing we have to kind of keep in mind with this. This is a really good football team that, that they played last night. So, Yeah, it's tough to swallow, but what are you going to do?
Right. And, tremendous amount of credit, obviously, to the 49ers. They did they had a great game plan for the Packers. They definitely attacked, their weaknesses, on defense in the middle of the field. That turnover that they forced, definitely got momentum on their side. And that's something that, obviously being the road team in this case, the Packers definitely didn't want to give that up. And, obviously Rodgers, as Packer fans, we're incredibly blessed to have a guy like him who rarely turns the ball over. And so the fact that the 49ers were able to capitalize on that, get that turnover, immediately turn it into, 7 points for their team, it was huge for them. And you have to give them a ton of credit. Yeah, definitely. I think, the offense in general has to definitely adjust better, and even though it's crazy to say this, even though the defense surrendered 37 points, they really only had one problem on the field yesterday, and that was, George Kittle. He racked up 6 catches on 6 targets for 129 yards and a touchdown. The other long completion to Samuel was a big play, that was a touchdown before the half. But as difficult as it is to see a loss like this, the Packers largely held the 49ers in check. Now, that is extremely tough to see because those 2 touchdown plays were huge gains, and otherwise there was really solid coverage by the cornerbacks. They got after, Garoppolo a little bit. It's not like he had this, 400-yard performance. All things considered, the Packers, had played pretty stingy defense at times. And I really think it was just a bad case of non-complimentary football where the offense literally did nothing almost to aid the defense. If they go down and get a score, it helps put a little momentum on their side. I mean, that stuff just didn't happen. It was, 23-0 at half, I believe. And that's when the game just really, really got away. And, it was tough to see, it's tough to witness, but, I think it's, fair to say, and I tweeted this yesterday or this morning rather, I think it's fair to say that our fan base should have tempered expectations from this team still. Mm-hmm. Because with all the turnover from last season to this season, it's a miracle that they're 8-3. And so there's a lot to be thankful for, thus far in the season. It was a bad loss. Let's burn the tape. Hopefully the Packers are definitely going to learn from these things and make the necessary adjustments, because if not, teams are going to continue to test their weaknesses.
Yeah, 100%. And honestly, those weaknesses were kind of exposed yesterday for the most part. Like, they just still are, like you said, George Kittle is a top 3 tight end in the league. So, of course, he was
right.
He was going to get his. And, of course, that 61-yard touchdown was an absolute dagger. And this, I think we've said it a couple of times, this defense is still pretty young. So they're going to have growing pains. They had, a pretty decent game. But like you said, they were given short field by the offense most of the night. The pass rush was able to get home a lot. 3 sacks for 26 yards. Like, that's pass rush was doing its job pretty well.
Right.
The secondary, Jair Alexander had a couple of nice plays in there. I think he's finally starting to learn how to be aggressive without, giving up the big play. But yeah, the Kevin King chasing down George Kittle definitely is a little bit of a concern that there was that big of a gap in protection. But, these are hopefully things that kind of get figured out over the course of the season. So I do think that they are starting to get some pieces back there, though. Like, Ibrahim Campbell starting to play a little bit more. And I think you're definitely seeing a change in the run defense, because there was a lot made about this San Francisco 49er run offense. And, they didn't have that great of a night. They obviously, I know, what is it, Morstart, or Raheem Morstart, had kind of a decent night, but, Tevin Coleman had 11 carries for 39 yards. Like, they weren't overly efficient in the running game. So,
right.
For a team that's been struggling on the run defensive side of the ball, they shut that down pretty well. So,
right.
It's hard to really be overly critical of the defensive side of the ball when the offense just played so poorly. When you're only getting 104 yards passing from Aaron Rodgers, something's wrong. So,
right. Yeah.
And that's creating a short field. So like, I got to give the defense a break.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, Rodgers, set a record yesterday. This is a record that, I'll have to mention. He posted the lowest yardage total of anyone with 20 completions in NFL history. Obviously, this is not going to help the defense that is having to, hold this team off. That's a very good offense with short field situations, with bad special teams play. And that's a whole nother topic. I think all in all, the defense is still a work in progress. The offense is still a work in progress. But I think there's a ton of promise for this season yet. This upcoming schedule has the Packers in good position to, like you said, still come out of this with earning a first-round bye in the playoffs, which would be huge.
Yep.
Because if a team like, I don't know, who would it be? Would it be the NFC? It may be an NFC North team or the NFC West. A team like possibly Seattle or Minnesota having to come to Green Bay, would be a challenge for either of those teams, or Dallas and whoever else is in it, the Saints, So, there's a chance that, that could end up being huge for the Packers as long as they get their stuff kind of, back in gear, but I'm of the positive side of this, knowing that the Packers, have a lot in front of them to look forward to. And, I think they can definitely right this ship and get things, going in a positive direction. And so I don't know, Matt, if you have anything else to mention before we talk a little bit about, the NFC North and all that kind of stuff.
No, and you bring up a good point. Like, this team is still in a good position they could potentially win out the rest of this season. The schedule really lightens up. They play Washington and the Giants the next 2 weeks. So these are teams that are well below 500, playing for top 10 draft picks essentially. So,
right.
And then, they're playing a Lions team at the end of the season who is probably without Matt Stafford, a Bears team who, really struggling against some not great opponents right now. So, really it's coming down to that, and we'll get into this here in a minute, is that showdown with the Vikings is going to be pretty crucial for the rest of this division. And if they win that one, there's a really good chance that this team could have a bye.
Right. And that's what we have to look forward to. I mean, 8-3, man, 8-3. I don't think there is a Packers fan out there realistically that could have said, the Packers are going to be 8-3, come Thanksgiving in the middle of November. I really don't think that was on anybody's radar. Now, granted, there's 5 NFL teams left to play. The Giants and the Redskins, as much as we'd love to just chalk those up at wins, they are NFL teams, and the Packers cannot overlook them. But they should be favored to win those games. And like you said, a struggling Bears offense, they have a solid defense, but I think it's a very winnable game as well because it's in Lambeau. That Vikings game is the real big one on the agenda. And so, there's a definite awesome, potential setup for playoffs here. And, Matt, I'm going to be totally honest with you. I have this team originally pegged as a 9-7 team, and they have completely outdone my expectations. I mean, completely. This would be a 9-2 team right now if it weren't for, a red zone interception, at home against Philly, or just whatever happened down in San Diego, which those were 2 very winnable games for the Packers. The only real loss that stings, right now is this San Francisco loss because, again, I know they're a good team. I just would have liked to see the Packers, put up a better performance against a good team like this. But that being said, they have a really, really good shot, to still win the NFC North and potentially get that first round bye. So, man, what's not to like about that? I think we got to delete this game from our memory moving forward. What do you say?
So I do want to bring up a couple of things here real quick, and it's mostly schedule related stuff. So we're talking about the division right now. I'll stick to the division, but the Minnesota Vikings remaining schedule is not an easy one. They have to go to Seattle next Monday night and play the Seahawks. Then they go play the Lions, and then they have to go out to San Diego to play the Chargers. And that, as we all know, is no cakewalk of a game. Then they have to go. Then they play Green Bay and then the Bears. So they have a lot of tough games remaining. So as long as they stay tight with the Vikings, this is very easily winnable division. But kind of to piggyback off of, this team is 8-3 right now, in a great position to go to the bye. Let's go to kind of some of these other teams' remaining schedules. So Seattle has to play, again, like we said, has to play the Vikings, have to play the Rams, Panthers, Cardinals, and 49ers. That's a murderous schedule at the end of that. The Saints probably have a little bit of an easier schedule here. They only have to play the 49ers and the Panthers, kind of some easier games with the Colts, Titans, and Falcons in there.
And not to mention the 49ers. They've got the Ravens, the Saints, the Rams, the Seahawks, and the Falcons coming up.
The 49ers could very easily lose 3 games at the end of this season. Easily lose 3 games at the end of this season. So last night's game could potentially not even matter if they lose three more games. So it's even if the Packers get a 2 seed out of this, I'm so all right with that. But to some of the points that we've been kind of making, they need to fix some of ththese things that have been going on with the offense. And with the leaky plays on defense, for me to feel good about them getting out of the divisional round. I mentioned it. I sent out a tweet earlier today where I was like, right now this is a good but not great team, and that's okay. This team was 6-9-1 last year. Yep. They're coming, complete coaching overhaul essentially. Coming off a really bad year with an injured Aaron Rodgers. They've come out, started 8-3. They have some things to work on, but every team has some things they're working on right now.
Right.
So, and there are things that at times have looked pretty darn good. Like the offense, when they're in rhythm and they're operating on all cylinders, they've looked really good. Defensively, the pass defenses looked really good, and the run defenses looked really good. So it's just I've kind of harped on it a couple of times on this podcast, not on this particular one, but in past weeks. They haven't had this game where they fired on all cylinders. They've obviously they're 6-1 against teams with records above 500, but we were kind of hoping that it could all combine in this game against the 49ers. So we still have yet to see the best that this team can offer. So I still have a lot of faith in this team, and I know we sent out a poll earlier today, and I was the one that was really optimistic there. I was all behind the Packers moving forward. So I don't know about you. How did you vote in the poll?
For me, I still have a ton of confidence in this team. And the question was asked, what's your confidence level with the Packers down the stretch of the final season? And it came down to a 2-way tie. 31% of our voters said kind of confident, and 31% said not confident at all. I believe that's the knee-jerk, response that you're going to get after a loss like this. But, Matt, we're sitting here talking about a potential first-round bye. Like, we've got to – you know what I'm saying? Like, I want Packer fans to hear this right now. We're talking about a first-round bye in the playoffs. This is a team that has missed the playoffs the last 2 years. And nobody was going into this season thinking about a potential playoff run, much less a first-round bye. So we're very fortunate to be in the position that we're in. We're very fortunate to be still very much in the lead of this race. We're in the top 3 teams in the NFC, and, they have a great shot at all these things aligning for them. Do they have things to work on? You said it. Yes, of course they do. But nobody in their right mind would have thought we'd be even talking about playoff chances, much less first round bye. So, hey, man, I think there's a lot to still be confident in. I'd like to see things get cleaned up just like you would. A big area that I think we need to touch on it just for a second. I want your thoughts on this. Not to switch gears and ruin the mood because we'll end on a high note, but we've got to talk about special teams. Somebody tweeted out yesterday, and it made me laugh. They said, how could our special teams be any worse than it was? And somehow the only guy that had a return yard, one return yard, I believe it was a punt return yard on this team, has been traded away. And the Packers, I believe, have -9. Is it -9 punt return yards on the season?
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to talk about special teams just for a second, because while we've seen the offense and the defense complement each other in games, and we've also seen special teams, I will say punting and, kicking become an asset to be the third complementary piece, we have not seen really anything from the special teams return game.
Mm-hmm.
How concerned are you, Matt, going forward with all this potential playoff stuff?
With regard to the playoffs, I think my opinion is this. If it comes down to special teams like punt returns and kick returns, there's something seriously wrong with the roster construction. Because at that point, if you're worried about how many yards you're getting on kick returns, yes, you can get better field position with that. But if your offense and your defense are playing well enough, there's oftentimes, you're starting from the 20 most times or the 25 most times. So I take that with a grain of salt. But I think, to your point, it is concerning because they have essentially punted on their return skills. They don't have – they traded Trevor Davis away. Clearly Shepard was not the answer and Smith's not the answer. So,
and Randall Cobb's a Cowboy.
And Randall Cobb's a Cowboy. And I'm sure that's painful to see firsthand. So, but, you just kind of, at this point, you just kind of hope somebody's back there who's just smart enough. I think that at the end of the day, that's all you're kind of hoping for. So, Smith hasn't been good. So, somebody who we might see moving forward a little bit, who has had some time returning kicks before and is a pretty heady guy, Tramon Williams would make a lot of sense back there. Just being a really heady guy, making sure that, if the ball's within the 10-yard line, you're not receiving it, or, if even on kick returns, just being smart with the ball. That's all you have. That's all you need to do to make sure that you just don't want to lose field position. You can just have it be, neutral essentially. So that's kind of all I hope for out of this return game. At this point, because obviously Trevor Davis isn't walking through the door. Micah Hyde's not walking through the door. So, you take what you can get and you just hope it's not negative.
Right. Yeah. And that's a great point that you made, it's just, again, not necessarily messing it up. It's like at this point, if you can fair catch a ball and not allow it to roll, like I believe, yesterday it happened, Smith is right up under this ball. He backs off at the last second and probably loses an additional 10 yards, and then he scoops it up. And I was like, oh my gosh, dude, what are you doing? The way that whole play, played out, I mean, it just had me scared half to death. I was like, dude, what are we doing in the return game? And so, I believe, you've got a great perspective on it. Yeah, let's not lose anything. But at the same time, it can be an area that can also be a big-time, game-changing, momentum-shifting play that the Packers have yet to take advantage of this season. Yep. So, that being said, going forward, it is a bit of a concern. I think J.K. has done decent throughout the year. I think he was much better earlier in the year. He's kind of a little bit off maybe the last few weeks. Hopefully he'll get it turned around. Crosby has done pretty solid all year, so there's nothing to complain about there, But, it's just something to kind of take note of, because at least, we would hope that these guys, would contribute in a much more explosive way. But, that being said, there's a lot to look forward to, coming into this upcoming game against the Giants. And so they are, how many wins did they have on the season, Matt?
The Giants? I think they're 2-9.
Yeah, I believe that is correct. So the Packers have a great shot at, winning this game. It's going to be a nooner. And hopefully they get into there, get out with the win, get out healthy. Another thing that we should touch on just briefly, Brian Bulaga did escape a potentially nasty injury, which is very fortunate for the Packers, because, Alex Light, while I think he was gritty, he toughed it out. Obviously we'd rather have Bulaga in there, at right tackle for the Packers. And so that was a bit of good news, going forward, and this team is still relatively pretty healthy, man, going down the stretch here. So I think those are all positive things that we can kind of just take from this weekend moving forward against the Giants. So do you have anything else, man, that you want to touch on real quick?
No, I think you hit pretty much everything on the head there. They can use this week and the following week. They play the Giants and then they play the Redskins. They can kind of use these as tune-up games. They go into that final stretch against the rest of the division and then lead into the playoffs. Like, they can get red hot before the playoffs. They just, you kind of wish they would have gone into that game last night and taken home a win. But, work on some stuff against the Giants this week, because, this Giants team is just not very good. They've struggled against, they're playing in a pretty easy division, all things considered, even with your Cowboys at the top there. But
aren't they? I think the Cowboys are tied with the Eagles right now, if I'm not mistaken.
I think they have I thought they had a 1-game lead on them, but it's close.
Maybe so.
But
what's funny to me is I just discovered right now that the Giants are actually in third place.
Yeah.
With 2 wins. I don't even know how that's possible.
The two worst teams in the NFC are in the same division, so it's really helpful for the Packers that they play that entire division this year. So,
right.
But just exercise your demons in this game. Get right. Make sure that what's been ailing the offense is worked out, and on the defensive side, Saquon Barkley will be a little bit of a challenge, but. Right. This is not that potent of an offense. You should be able to just shut down Barkley and try and let Daniel Jones beat you.
Yeah. And hey, let's reminisce a little bit. I think it was back in 2010 when the Packers needed a big win to propel them into a playoff push. Obviously, it was a different scenario, but it came against the New York Football Giants. And so I'm going to look for this week to be a game where the Packers can really, really stomp on their opponent and really build something off of this win going forward. I do not want to see this be a close game, because this should not be a close game. If the Packers can handily beat the Giants, I'm going to be definitely excited for what's to come in the future. So they got 2 good games to hopefully give them a head full of steam into a couple challenging ones against division opponents to finish off the season. And so, hey, man, let's look forward to the Packers coming up with a W over there at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey against the Giants. And so let me get a final score prediction from you, Matt. Final score, Packers go into the Giants. What is the final score going to be?
Simply because I think they're on the road and they're kind of trying to work on some things. It won't be super high scoring, but I don't think anything like 28-14 is my guess. Packers try and get a little bit more creative, work on some different things that maybe had worked earlier in the season, but ultimately are just too much for the Giants.
Man, you know what? I'm not usually like this, but I'm going big, man. Go big or go home. So I'm going with a 38-10 victory. Green Bay over there at MetLife Stadium, just going to slaughter the Giants. Why don't we say Darnell Savage or Alexander is going to have a pick six. The Smith brothers are going to come up with, let's say, about 5 sacks. And Aaron Rodgers is going to put up at least 300 yards passing, and Aaron Jones is going to have himself a day as well. So that being said, we're looking forward to the Packers taking on the New York Football Giants upcoming this weekend. Tune in. Listen, we appreciate every single one of you for tuning into this podcast. We are so appreciative to be able to do this for you, the fans. And so we just want to take time to appreciate all of our listeners. It's been a great season. Matt, I've thoroughly enjoyed working with you all season. We got a few games to go, but I just wanted to say thank you, Matt, so much for doing what you do, man. You are an absolute great partner in crime here on the PTTF podcast.
That goes both ways, Duke. It's been an absolute pleasure, and let's hope that we can keep doing this throughout the rest of the season and hopefully into the postseason.
Absolutely. And so, hey, listen, he's Matt, I'm Duke. You can find us on Twitter. You can also follow the PTTF podcast on Twitter. We've got a bunch of people that are following our page, and we appreciate all the support. Please, when you see these episodes, hit that retweet button, share it, like it, tune in, listen, get your morning coffee, have a listen to two dudes just talking Packers. It'll get your day going, and we're always excited to do this for you guys. And so with that being said, we're going to sign off for today, but Matt, hit him always with a big old go, Pack, go.
Go, Pack, go.